Coming up in today's IdeaSpace podcast.
Because you'd be surprised how many pitches Phil and I and others in Cambridge Angel see, and we think, we've read the 12 slides and we think, what does this company actually do? And we're still confused, and that's not good.
Never, ever, in my mind, I don't know whether Simon would disagree, but never, ever send your pitch to people without pitching in front of them.
Other mistakes that are made are saying the market size is X, we are going to have 10% of X, and they've got no idea how they're going to get 10% of X.
Welcome to the IdeaSpace podcast. I'm Ben Hartley, head of IdeaSpace. IdeaSpace is a community of entrepreneurs, founders and their teams, many of them working alongside each other in one of our 3 offices based in and around Cambridge. Our members share knowledge, experience and expertise to help themselves and others in their high-impact venture creation. In this Business Basics episode, we're talking with Simon Thorpe and Phil O'Donovan from Cambridge Angels. We talk about how to find the right investors, tips and advice on pitching and presenting, and how to avoid some of the typical mistakes made by early-stage startups when trying to raise money. Simon is a qualified chartered accountant with a 25-year city career and 12 years of angel investing experience. He's the current chair of Cambridge Angels, a member of Angel Academy, non-exec director and board observer for numerous tech companies, and mentors for various university and angel programs. Simon is an active angel investor in UK companies with a focus on the technology sector. His current portfolio consists of 36 companies, and to date he has achieved 9 exits. Phil is an engineer and Cambridge-based mentor, director and angel investor in technology startups. He's a speaker at universities and business schools on entrepreneurial topics and an advisor to organisations wishing to commercialise their IP. As a founding managing director, Phil helped grow Cambridge-based Cambridge Silicon Radio from a startup of 9 into the largest global market supplier of Bluetooth chips with an annual revenue of $1 billion in 2012. And by 2015 had shipped 4 billion chips. The company was acquired by Qualcomm in September 2015 for $2.5 billion. If you have an interest in startups or in entrepreneurship or are seeking to raise some investment for a new venture yourself, this episode will be right up your street. Okay, well, Simon and Phil, thank you very much for being here with us today. And the idea is that we're really just going to be talking about maybe specifically a bit of pitching for any founders or potential founders and entrepreneurs, but we'll also talk about investing and what you do and your experiences in investing in startups. So firstly, can I just ask about your backgrounds and how you got into this gig, should I say?
Well, thank you, Ben. Thank you for having me here. I mean, in my case, rather unusual route in the sense that I actually started with an economics degree and did accountancy, believe it or not. Most people forget that I'm an accountant. I've forgotten myself, actually. But I went to be an equity analyst and got very interested in technology and life sciences. This was back in the early 90s, a very long time ago. And actually, investors around the world wanted growth shares, and growth shares were largely technology and life sciences. And of course, that's exactly what we do in Cambridge. And that's what I've been investing in the last 12 or so years. I've invested in 50 plus companies in the UK, mainly technology, and increasingly more healthcare, because that's been a strong feature, as you'll know, of the Cambridge ecosystem. So that's how I got to being an angel investor.
Right. And Phil?
Well, I'm an engineer, and I've spent most of my life in communications companies. Some very large companies. I worked for ITT, which was the second largest telecoms company in the world, that actually decided there was no future in telecoms back in the 80s and sold itself. But I've worked for Cambridge Consultants, a local design and development company, and from there we spun out a company called originally Cambridge Silicon Radio, or CSR PLC, because we floated on the London Stock Exchange. And in fact, we became the largest manufacturer of Bluetooth chips using the fabless semiconductor model. So that was a good success. We sold the company for a lot of money to Qualcomm, and I then became a Cambridge Angel, where I hope to spot the next opportunity and put my money in and work with the company to make it a success.
It's really interesting, and the fact that you've got very different backgrounds but have ended up at Angels. Do you find that with Cambridge Angels specifically, or probably a lot of angel investors have very varied backgrounds, and do you think that's really helpful when it comes to investing in startups?
Yeah, so in Cambridge Angels, there are 60 of us, and we all have very different backgrounds. Most, as Phil says, most of our members are engineers or computer scientists, or have got healthcare domain expertise. And increasingly, as you'll know, healthcare is becoming more computational, and some of these skills are converging. But yes, the short answer to your question is a huge diversity of skills and backgrounds within the group.
And that's what makes investing with fellow Cambridge Angels very interesting and indeed helpful. When I, after the success of CSR, I invested in a few companies and sometimes found that I was the only angel investor. And like being an entrepreneur founder, it can be lonely being a sole investor, and you need other investors to talk to share ideas with, to complement each other in order to help the company. So as Simon has said, we are a very diverse group, and I would say that some 70-80% are people who have perhaps a technical background, have made a success with companies, but of course there are others, analysts and economists, who together we make a diverse and complementary mix.
So it'd be really good just to talk about the types of investments. We'll have some listeners who are not entirely aware of how it works, but just on a basic level, we've got pre-seed, seed, and then various series or rounds of investment that take maybe a startup up to a point where they exit, and that can be as small as, I guess, 50,000 or whatever's needed as a pre-seed to get the thing going, all the way up to hundreds of millions when you get into the later rounds coming towards pre-exit. So can you tell me where Cambridge Angels or Angels might sit in that?
Yes, so Ben, it's a great question. There's lots of jargon here of the terms, the pre-seed, the seed, the Series A, B, C, etc. But what does this really mean? Cambridge Angels tend to focus on very early stage companies. So that may be Phil or I meeting somebody literally here at the Heuser Forum, or in a garage somewhere in Cambridge, or on one of the 20 science parks with an idea. And hopefully that individual will team up with another individual, and there'll be two founders. That's kind of our ideal model. And those two individuals often need help at the beginning. They're thinking, where do I find the finance? Who could finance me? What other skills might I need? I don't know anything about finance or HR because I'm an engineer. How do I find out about those things? And Phil and I and others in Cambridge Angels have done those things before, so we can point young entrepreneurs in the right direction. And that's what we like doing. A large part of our job is to mentor and coach young entrepreneurs.
So it's not, for Angels, it's not just money you're putting in, it's expertise as well.
Absolutely, it's expertise. And we call that smart capital at Cambridge Angels because actually recently, over the last decade, the amount of money out there has increased enormously. So there's a lot of money out there, but I always say expertise is considerably more scarce.
Mm. And in terms of the return on your investment, is what sort of, or firstly, how do you see a return on your investment? And next, what's the sort of time frame that would take place for you?
I think the statistics say that a lot of investors look at getting a return within 5 to 7 years. It isn't always the case that that's possible, but one should know after that length of time whether a company is on the right track, is on the right road. Just doubling back to starting out, one of the things I think is great about the Cambridge area is that for budding entrepreneurs in the university or elsewhere, there are a large number of entrepreneurial focused courses here at IdeaSpace, also the Maxwell Centre, the Judge, and other places. And what they do is provide entrepreneurs a window onto entrepreneurial activity, what it takes to found a company, how you should market your products, what you should do with your technology to wrap it up in such a way that it's suitable for not only for investment in the first instance, but also, of course, delivery to customers. So Cambridge is a great ecosystem for entrepreneurs, and starting with a course or two, I think is a useful idea.
Phil mentioned a really important point, which is collaboration. That's one of the things that Cambridge is extremely good at. And actually, if you think about, there's a phrase in technology, collaborate or die. And if you think about platform businesses, which many people try to build, the obvious ones being Amazon or eBay, is you need to partner very early. And if you're going to partner with other potential players in your marketplace, you need to collaborate. So that's a really important part of understanding the success of Cambridge, and actually why it's a great place to be an entrepreneur, because people like us want to help entrepreneurs.
So we at IdeaSpace, we have a lot of early stage founders, as there are across Cambridge and cities across the world at the moment. It appears to be definitely booming. How do they find you, or how do they find investors early on? So we do get people who have got a concept, an idea, they started a business model, they might have a product and a prototype, whether it's a service or an actual physical product, and they do come to us and say, well, where do I start? How do I find? I need someone early on. Where do I start? So where do they start?
Often it's organic. You're working with people, you're studying with people, and you find that you gel so far as ideas and concepts are concerned. But if you, it is lonely being a sole founder. As Simon has said, you need a couple. In fact, at CSR, we had 9 founders, 3 founding directors and 6 founding engineers. But what I encourage people, particularly at the university, to do is if you have a great idea, and entrepreneurs, of course, should always think that their ideas are great, you should perhaps look around the people you're studying with, working with. Maybe I've suggested, and this seems to work, put a couple of notices up to say, I'm having coffee in the buttery or the canteen, at 11 o'clock on Tuesday. Why don't you come and join, have a chat? Do that for a few Tuesdays, and see who comes to chat with you. And that may well turn out to be a selection of those people, the founding group for that company.
And when that group has got together and they're looking for money early on, how do they find you, or do you find them?
Well, I think Phil just said earlier, there's all these different entities around Cambridge that can help you. So there are incubators, accelerators, the Judge Business School, all these different hubs, if you like, that form part of the cluster. This being one of them. So you've got lots of places to go, and those places all know where to find investors.
Right. So they're going to point.
They'll say you can come to Cambridge Angels, or you could go to Cambridge Enterprise, which is the technology transfer arm, or if you're thinking bigger, you can go to Cambridge Innovation Capital when you've got that later stage, perhaps when you've got to Series A, or you're thinking about that. But understanding the funding ecosystem is one of the things that you need to understand early on as an entrepreneur.
Right.
What the entrepreneurial courses that we've mentioned do is provide some structure and some filling in of the gaps, if you like, in the knowledge of what it takes to form and execute a successful company. Business models, for example. Are you selling a service? Are you a consulting company? Do you sell time for money? Are you running a service online, such as Amazon, for example, the aggregator model? Or indeed, are you making a product? Something in a hard shell that's a consumer product that will sell in the shops, or indeed on Amazon. And the business models for those things that I've mentioned, those businesses that I've mentioned, are actually quite different. And what they determine is the amount of cash that you will need to fund that business until break even, the sort of staff that you'll need. For example, if you're running a product company, you will need people who understand manufacturing and how you will get the product made reliably and shipped out to customers in the marketplace. So, amongst other things, business models are something that the courses at IdeaSpace, Judge, Maxwell Center give you an idea about in order to design your business as you're starting out. And that, just coming on to investors, will very much determine the amount of money that you in the long term, over 3, 4, 5 years, need to raise, and also in the first instance as well. And that will then point you at family and friends, or angels, or VCs, or indeed large VCs, perhaps.
Mm. So, say we've got a found, either you found an idea or they've found you. Is the founder as important as the idea for you?
Well, so I always, we get asked this question a lot, obviously, and I always think about team, tech, and traction. That's one way to describe it. But first of all, you have to bear in mind that investors are looking for investable people. So if the team isn't right, we will move on to something else. So first of all, the team's got to be right. Secondly, as Phil says, there's got to be something really interesting from a technology point of view. And then thirdly, there's got to be some demonstration of traction. Now, obviously, when you start, you're going to have little traction, but that traction might be that individual or that team has actually already sought out good feedback, has already thought about their business model, thought about the sorts of questions Phil's just described about, is it a licensing or so on. And so that one already has confidence as an investor that this individual, this team is actually thinking in the right way and starting to be open-minded about taking feedback. One of the things that we love to see in our entrepreneurs is that they actually are willing to listen to feedback. They won't take it all on, they won't act on all of it, but they need to be good listeners.
Sorry, Phil.
Yeah, just to add to that, there was a book written many years ago by one of the first VC company, or chap in the first VC, excuse me, by a fellow in one of the first VC companies in Menlo Park, just outside San Francisco. And he was asked by a journalist what he looked for in a startup. And he said, I look for three things. I look for management, management, and management. His idea being that good managers can actually make a success, whereas poor ones don't. Key thing, though, is as a startup, as a group of founders, you won't have all of the skills that you need, and that doesn't matter. What you need when you're pitching to investors is to pitch yourselves, the founding team, and to know or to point out that, of course, there are gaps. You know, you're not a complete management team, and that doesn't matter. You can grow and fill those gaps as you need. And one of the key things, of course, is that it's often said that, and I certainly believe this, that there needs to be a boss, he or she, who runs the company, sometimes called the managing director, sometimes called the CEO. And that person, sometimes it's said the qualification for a good CEO is to have gained experience having been a CEO beforehand. Which is, sometimes not true. And if you look at some of the greatest CEOs around, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, they're great CEOs. They weren't CEOs before they became a great CEO. So don't worry about putting yourself forward as the boss, the CEO, the managing director for this company.
That's really good advice, and we do get asked that a lot. We'll have especially because a lot of spin-outs, they'll come from an academic background or a technical background, and they just don't see themselves as CEO. And the first thing they'll say is, where do I, how do I find a CEO? How do I find someone to run the business? To a certain extent, you have to say, well, that's what business is. You have to do a lot of that stuff, but also that there isn't a typical CEO. You're not born to be it. You can gain a huge amount of experience to help you to carry out that role.
And that indeed is one of the great things about starting businesses in Cambridge. There are so many mentors, coaches, and in particular role models around Cambridge. I mean, at CSR, when we started, we thought, well, this is a pretty big task we're taking on. When will we be up to it? And we looked around and we saw Arm, great company, just down the road in Cambridge. And we looked at some of the founders of Arm, some of whom we knew we'd worked with, and we said, well, if they can do it, we can do it. And having those role models, of which there is a plethora around Cambridge, is very helpful and motivating to a founding team.
Can I just go back now to the pitch element, obviously? So we've got you together, investor and founder or startup, or maybe even small team. What's the first thing they should do? Should they send you pitch decks, or should pitch decks always be pitched in person?
Well, I think this is something I was just going to talk about, Ben, is that when should you raise money? When you don't need it. Now, that really prompts the question of actually preparing well ahead of time. So back to Phil's point about developing relationships in the network, developing your own network, go out and ask people. Say, I've got this idea, I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about my team, I'm thinking about my business model. What do you think? I think there might be a gap here. Do you think it is a gap, or isn't it a gap? And so that's a very important thing, because that enables you to start having discussions with potential investors. And once you've done that, that will lead naturally into a conversation about, is it the right time to raise money, or what things do I need to do in order to get what we call investable? And that will then lead you into what type of materials would I need? Usually it's a pitch deck. It's usually 10 or 12 slides. And in that 10 or 12 slides, you should be able to articulate clearly what you actually do, because you'd be surprised how many pitches Phil and I and others in Cambridge Angel see, and we think, we've read the 12 slides and we think, what does this company actually do? And we're still confused, and that's not good. So something about the team, something about the technology, something about the intellectual property, or the IP as we call it, something about the market opportunity, clearly something about the business model, because we need to understand how the business model is going to work. So those are the principal things we'd want to see in a pitch deck, usually 10 to 12 slides. In the background, we want to understand there's been a proper business plan, because we want to understand the company gone through a discipline of thinking about their business very, very clearly.
Yes, as Simon has said there, that pitch deck, 10 or 12 slides, should say everything that an investor needs to know about the company. And actually at the Cambridge Angels, we do things a slightly different way, in that we have a process called informal pitching, where every month we get together a group of founders, founding companies who wish to have investment. They have half an hour each with us. We say, no PowerPoint, you must pitch to us without slides. And that means, of course, that they need to do it in 10 minutes or quarter of an hour, because they should leave quarter of an hour afterwards for discussion within that half an hour. And you need to get across, as Simon has said, all of those points, those 5 or 6 key points about what's your business, what problem are you solving for customers, what's the opportunity in terms of the market, is it a global growing market, what's the business model, how much money do you need initially, and indeed what are the strengths and maybe the gaps in the management team. And we can often see in that pitching clearly that a company has what it takes. If they don't, that doesn't matter either. We perhaps coach them and advise them as to what they need to do to get ready for that pitching. Just one point on pitching is sometimes asked, now, valuation. What should our valuation be? You will find it very difficult to say what your valuation should be without discussing with people who perhaps have been there before as to what it ought to be. But the only way of getting a good valuation is competition. Kiss as many frogs as you can in order to find that, whatever the simile is, prince or princess within those frogs. And in that way, you get the best competition. It's like selling a second-hand car, and many investors, VCs, don't like that analogy. But if nobody's interested, you won't get a good price. If lots of people are interested, you will get a good price. And I'd just like to say, finally, never ever, in my mind, I don't know whether Simon would disagree, but never ever send your pitch to people without pitching in front of them. Those dry slides, some things won't be comprehensible, understandable by the investor. Good chance it may go in the bin. If you have practiced, and if you are a founder with, or a founding group with some level of engagement or ability to create engagement with investors, you can enthuse them while you're talking about your pitch, or indeed, as I say, for us angels, without a pitch, just talking about the opportunity that you see and how you'll solve the problems and how you'll indeed make money for your investors. So my advice, never send your pitch dry to investors without meeting them.
And you're nodding there, Simon. Do you?
Well, when you're kissing your frogs, it's important to kiss relevant frogs. So a very simple example is, if an investor is known for only investing in B2B companies, don't go to them with a B2C pitch.
Right. Would you expect a working sort of prototype or a demo of whatever it is that's even at that early stage?
Yeah, a demo is really powerful. And obviously, if it's a physical product, then show it on a Zoom call if you can. Demonstrate. We've had a few examples of that all the time. If you've got a software demo, try and do a very, very slick video. Make a slick video, which is 90 seconds, or 2 minutes, but short and sweet, which actually demonstrates your product or software.
Do you ever find yourself thinking, wait a second, are they exaggerating this, the share of the market they might be able to get, or the lack of competitors out there, or is that something that frustrates you, or do you find that people don't make that mistake?
We get very frustrated sometimes with a couple of phrases. One is, we have no competition. Usually that means you haven't found it, or you're doing something that nobody's interested in. So there is always competition. Also, again, we hear it a lot, is now we're doing something interesting, and this is a 10 billion a year market. And we say, yes, okay. And how can you prove to us that you'll have a significant share of that? The answer to that actually is you need to do it both ways. Analysts, bank analysts and others produce excellent reports that talk about the potential size of a new market for a new service or for a new product. And that may be tens of billions. But what you need to do is to demonstrate your knowledge of the market and the players within it by saying, well, we've had initial discussions with company X and company Y, and they say that if we do what we say we're going to do, they will buy an amount of it, and that will add up to maybe millions or tens of millions, and that's far more credible than saying there's a vast market out there, full stop.
Right. What other mistakes do you see in that initial pitch, or maybe actually even within the pitch deck itself and what they're showing? Because they might think what they're showing on their slides is what you want to see, but you might say, actually, you're wasting 5 slides there. We don't need that.
Well, sometimes we see, and the reason why we quite like the informal pitching is that an entrepreneur has to tell a story in their own words. And if they're passionate and can capably articulate their story, they will be able to do that effectively in 10 minutes. And you'll also get a feel for the fact that it's a journey, to use that. I don't really like the word, but what we're really trying to say is that when you get into bed with investors, you are going to be married to them for a long time. And therefore, this is not a static process. It's not a point in time. You build a relationship with your investors, just like you build a relationship with your customers, and you're going to be with them for a long time into the future. So this is why you always need to think ahead to when you want to raise money, when you want to target new customers, etc. And so that's a really important point to make.
Yes, there's, of course, around Cambridge, there's an awful lot of science and an awful lot of technology. And you asked the question, Ben, about how do you demonstrate the goodness or the potential of your technology? And sometimes this word minimum viable product is used. It's something that will enable you to demonstrate the benefits or the potential benefits of the technology. It's said that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and indeed a demonstration, be it of an MVP rather than the final product, is worth maybe half an hour of arm waving. So that MVP is very useful if you can put it together. In terms of the pitch and the things in it, and maybe this is a discussion we can have, because I know it's a point that comes up in many angel groups, and that is it's all about the exit. And my view is that it isn't all about the exit. It is all about the exit so far as perhaps some of the investors are concerned. But what the most important thing is for the founding group, and indeed for the investors, is to grow a massively successful company. And if you grow a great company, there will be any number of exits along the way for founders, if they want them, for staff, and indeed for investors. So it isn't about the exit. It's about growing a great company. And as we've said before, there are a lot of institutions, education institutions and founders and who've exited, and role models who can help you on your journey.
And I think that's a potential mistake. You asked about mistakes. Entrepreneurs usually say, we're going to exit in 3 to 5 years' time. And of course, we know that that's wrong, because they won't. Some of them might exit in 18 months, and that has happened to me, some of my companies. But that's not necessarily a good outcome. It might be, but actually it might mean that the company sold way, way too early and hasn't actually delivered on its potential. And as Phil says, we're really looking for companies and entrepreneurs that we think are genuinely ambitious and want to grow scalable companies. And back to your point about timing, how long it takes to grow a real business, it is a bit of a hockey stick, and the most valuable companies tend to take 15 years to develop and build. 7 to 10 years, as Phil said earlier, is kind of quite a usual thing. But so it is not a short term. It's a game back to this building a relationship. You're going to be with your investors for a long time. So thinking about that. Other mistakes that are made are saying the market size is X. We are going to have 10% of X. And they've got no idea how they're going to get 10% of X. So that's something I don't really like to see in pitches. That's another mistake.
So they don't necessarily factor in the cost of acquiring customers.
Yes, and also they really don't have any idea actually how they're going to achieve a 10% market share of the market, right, even if they can define the market effectively, which they probably can't.
Yeah.
So those are some other mistakes.
But is it worth them taking a stab anyway, or would you just say, look, unless you have a real sense of it or knowledge of it, it's best to leave it out? Or would you just say, well, okay, look, at least they're thinking about it?
I think you can take a stab by building from the bottom up. So as we've been discussing, don't start with the 10 billion and we think we'll have 10% of that. Oh, that's 1 billion. That's impressive. Nobody will believe you, because they know that if you put the argument that way, you don't really know how you're going to do it. So what you need to do, indeed what we did at CSR, Bluetooth was a massive market. It was a big bandwagon. We were actually Bluetooth Special Interest Group member number 10 at CSR. There are now 30,000 members, and as we all know, Bluetooth is in many products. What we did in order to focus our interest and make our pitches to first investors was to say, what are those key market segments for Bluetooth? And we identified 5, like mobile phones, like cordless headsets, like laptops. And then for each of those 5 segments, we said, who are the key players in those segments? Clearly in the mobile phones, there was Nokia, Ericsson, and Sony, for example. So we said, okay, we know a little about those companies because a few of us had experience with working with those companies. Let's try and build from the bottom up our numbers. And we did. And we came to some numbers that were very, very much lower than 10% of 1 billion. They were a couple of percent of 10 billion. But we were able to say, and this is how those numbers build. If we take Sony and if we look at their PlayStations, which we think could benefit from having Bluetooth, how many of those do they sell a year? What would be the growth of us selling Bluetooth into those PlayStations for years 1, 2, and 3? And in that way, we built the numbers from the bottom up. And indeed, you don't need to think that you need to have vast experience of working with companies like that to do this. Most of this is desk research. Having the right numbers, which you can easily get from the internet, from analyst reports, and build a picture. and throw in, and by the way, we had a word with Sony, and what they said was, which is far more impressive than saying, in a oblique way, we have 10% of 10 billion, therefore it's 1 billion.
And also to add to that, of course, what we do want to see numbers in these pitches. So we do want to see that the research has been done. So I'm not saying we shouldn't see a market size or estimates, but if you want to phrase, if we were to achieve a 10% market share, it would be X amount, and this is how we would proceed to trying to achieve that. The other thing I would say is that often the most attractive investments for investors like ourselves is an entrepreneur creating a new market. And if you're creating a new market, there won't be any market share or market size data out there.
Yeah, we do have. In fact, we've got a founder currently who's got something very novel, and it is really hard to when she's asking, how do I sort of explain what the market is and how big the market is and what our share might be when this is such a novel technology. But I guess with something like that, it's exciting enough for you anyway as investors to just think, okay, look, we're all in this together, as in not understanding what's out there.
Well, Ben, you can do some parallel comparisons. So you could say, we think this market is going to behave in the way that market behaves.
Got you. Okay.
So Phil used the CSR example. I had a very interesting example with a company called ViewRanger, which is based in Cambridge and has 2 years ago was sold to a German company called Outdoor Active. And back in 2008-9, just after Apple had launched the first iPhone, ViewRanger had essentially software that was based on the Symbian platform, Nokia's Symbian platform. And along comes Apple and along comes Android. And the decision at that time was to, which platforms should we be on? Which platforms should we port the software? And we had to think, well, do we want to be Apple, Android? Do you remember BlackBerry? Do you remember Microsoft Windows? They were going to be operating platforms. So we had to decide which ones. Then fortunately, we picked Apple and Android, which turned out to be the right decision. Yeah. Little did we know that Symbian was going to disappear in the way that it did, Nokia having had a global market share of smartphones. So that we had to think about how the future of that industry in order to position the company effectively, and that did work.
And that comes down to perhaps why investors invest in certain companies. You can look at the numbers, you can look at the projections, look at the story that the founders are playing about their opportunity. But one of the key things I think is, and it certainly applies to me, is gut feel. For the example you gave, Ben, of an idea, an opportunity, hasn't been done before, what on earth will it mean to people? Key thing about technology, and it's been proven time and time again, is that although the so-called experts and the pundits can predict what the technology will be used for, bottom line is that may be the case, but there will be a whole bunch of other applications and uses that people don't predict before the technology hits the market. I remember a phrase, well, I don't remember it, I remember reading a phrase that apparently Henry Ford of Ford Motor Car said, and he said, I didn't ask customers what they wanted. If I'd asked customers whether they wanted faster transport, they would have said, yes, carriages with 4 wheels and faster horses. Nobody at that time knew about the industrial combustion engine, except a few engineers and groups of people who said there's some potential here, but he put it in a car with 4 wheels and created a great success.
That's I love that story, that analogy. Just talking about the sort of more novel, it might be novel technology or something new. NDAs. I get asked, should I get them to sign an NDA? And likewise, you get people walking away from a potential investor because they haven't wanted to sign an NDA. Can you tell me your thoughts on that?
Well, NDAs were a feature 10, 15 years ago. They're not anymore for us. It's a relationship of trust. And when we're working with entrepreneurs, it has to be a relationship of trust. So we don't, rarely do we sign an NDA. There may be a specific circumstance where an NDA may be appropriate, but in general terms, they're not used in when we receive. I mean, in Cambridge Angels last year, we received 1,300 pitches.
Wow!
Just in 2021,
wow.
And if you think we did 16 new investment rounds last year. We did almost the same number of follow-ons. So if you think about it, we probably invested between 30 and 40 rounds last year, and we saw 1,300 pitches. So the funnel's big.
The funnel is big, right? So we can
just to comment on NDAs. We, as Simon has said, if I'm asked to sign an NDA before I've had a discussion with founders, I'll say, sorry, go somewhere else. An NDA may be appropriate once you've built a relationship, once you've talked a fair bit about the investing structure that you and the founders find attractive. If you want to do due diligence on the technology, it may be that you need to take a deep look at the technology, and on that basis, it may be appropriate to sign an NDA, but certainly not up front.
Not conceptually. Right, so we can put that to bed. And when we come in contact with those founders asking that question, we can say, look, don't worry and don't miss a great opportunity on something that really isn't, it's not as important as you think it is.
But that's why you do need to pick your investors carefully, because you do need to trust them.
Yeah. Do you find that on that? Do you find that some founders don't know enough about you, either personally or indeed what Cambridge Angels is, and you think, well, you haven't done your homework on me because they're asking me questions that that aren't my area of expertise, or do you find that?
Well, I think that is a really good question. It's about doing your homework on your investors before you talk to them, and if you'd understood the Cambridge ecosystem well enough, you would understand in Cambridge Angels who to go to. And you might understand that, as we've been discussing, Phil's background's very different from mine. So if, for example, I was looking to discuss a semiconductor company, Phil is one of the people in the group I'd go to, because he's got some of the most expertise in that sector, which I don't have. If I wanted to look at a marketplace company, I'll probably go to Andy Phillips. If I wanted to think about a deeply computational healthcare company, I'll probably go to Andy Richards or Pam Garside or Barbara Domain-Hayman. So go to the people that you think have got the expertise that's relevant to the business or vision that you have.
Yeah, and further downstream, when you're perhaps closer to doing a deal, the VCs, the investors, will probably be taking references on you, but you should take references on them. Ask them what they think their best investments were. And indeed, you can often find this, of course, on the website. Phone those companies and find out what they think, whether they really enjoyed the experience of having that investor invest in them. Mostly, the answer will be yes. Sometimes it might not be. But do take references, because they will be taking references on you.
Right. No, that's excellent advice, and I certainly wouldn't have thought of that. I guess not in summary, but overall, what makes a good pitch or presentation a great pitch or presentation?
I think it's covering, as we've said earlier, in that short space of time. And don't forget, sometimes there are opportunities for so-called elevator pitches. You have 2 or 3 minutes to talk to a key player. How can you get your point across? You can't talk about the technology and how it works. You can't talk about the vast size of the market and all the players. You have to, the phrase is often used, value proposition. You have to put your value proposition across very succinctly and very swiftly. For example, Uber. I think their value proposition is your day belongs to you. You pick up your phone, you make a phone call, A car arrives, you get in it, you get out, you use your phone, you make the payment. No hassle with money, with phoning, with queuing. Apple's value proposition, they've actually used in the past, our value proposition is we make magical products. Now, I actually use many Apple products because I do think they're very attractive to use. They all work together. I like them. Are they really magical? I'm not sure. So key thing, I think, for any presentation, be it 1 minute, 2 minute, or indeed half an hour, or indeed hours, is to be able to get your message across. And the key message for investors is, how are we solving customer problems? And therefore, having the ability to solve those problems, how will they buy from us? And what are our profit margins when they do buy from us? And more importantly, how do we scale the company? How do we grow the company after that?
I think you know a good pitch when you see one, and occasionally you'll have this light bulb moment where you see a 2 founders or 3 founders pitch, and you say, wow, those individuals are really impressive. They've told me a story that I get immediately. I understand why they're doing it, why they are the people to do it, because they've got a background in that thing. And they often tell a very compelling story. And often there's some personal aspect to it. You know, we have studied a PhD in this particular subject. Our dissertation has been this. We know, we know they're probably an expert in that space. They've really thought about it, and they've, as Phil said earlier, they met some of their contemporaries who are doing the same thing. So there's a coherent team. They're already there. They're pitching a great idea, and you can see that there's a great market opportunity, and perhaps it is a new market. So we see enough pitches that we see that we can get that very quickly.
Yeah, I bet.
And Simon mentioned Edison, the light bulb. Sorry, he mentioned the light bulb moment. Edison, of course, invented the light bulb. And many people said he invented other things too. But many people said to him, now, how come you've invented the light bulb, you've invented this, you've invented that? Aren't you a lucky person? And he said, actually, yes, I am lucky. But the strange thing is, the harder I work, the luckier I get. And I think the bottom line to that is, if you want to be a founder and you don't succeed, try again. Keep trying until you do it. My only regret in life at my mature age now is that I didn't start earlier. I wished I'd started earlier because, I then might have been able to do 2 or 3 companies that were a great success. I only managed 1 so far. So never give up.
That's great advice. And I know there'll be lots that will like hearing that, because a lot of being part of the community, the Idea Space is really a community of founders, is that you see other people making the same mistakes. You see people failing or having failed before and stuck at it. And, to take a big knockback, it can really knock the wind out the sails. And you just got to say, look around you. Other people have had the same knockbacks and they've made a success. So that is good advice. I was going to actually just touch on something you both said about the pitches and the presentations. I know there are lots of people who aren't necessarily outgoing or confident or public, good at public speaking. Do you see through that sort of nerves, or is there some way that people can sort of mitigate for that when presenting?
Well, the best way of mitigating is to train yourself. Right. When I was a teenager, I couldn't think of anything else than anything worse than public speaking, and now I do it all the time. And it's because I've trained myself to do it. I've been trained, and it takes time. It takes longer for some people than others. Some people are naturals, but if you're not a natural, get yourself trained, get yourself comfortable, and a part of doing that is preparing. Doing your homework, making sure you're on top of your subject before you present, but also watching other people that really do pitch well. Look at what they do really well. Some men and women are incredibly inspiring when you listen to them. I was just listening to Lise Doucet on Desert Islands just now. What an incredibly impressive woman! And I was just absolutely enthralled by everything she said. And okay, that's not about investment. She doesn't like to be called a war reporter, but that's what she is in Afghanistan and Syria. I mean, what that person has been through is just extraordinary. And listening to her tell her story was fascinating. So as an entrepreneur, you've got to be able to tell a story that people think, wow, I want to be part of that. I want to join and help that entrepreneur achieve that. And I've had that with many Cambridge companies that started off with 2 people and they're now 150 people, and they've sold to Microsoft or to Apple, or they're still going in Cambridge building an even bigger company, which is probably even better than selling to Microsoft or Apple, dare I say that.
Yeah. Same for me. I remember my first presentation in my 20s, my first job after university. I was very scared and very worried about giving the presentation, and I practiced, and I'm sure I didn't do a very good job. But as Simon has said, because both of us now have had much practice, we deliver hopefully reasonably smoothly. But I think the key thing is it doesn't matter how much experience you have, how old you are. If you've got something worth saying, if you really believe in what you're doing and its potential, then you can talk about it. And if you talk about it naturally in the way that you normally talk to your friends about things, investors will see that and they will appreciate that. And you don't have to be super polished. In fact, super polish, sometimes is a bit of a put-off because it's all presentation and no depth.
No passion as
exactly.
well, probably.
And just as perhaps a piece of advice, what you could maybe benefit from as budding entrepreneurs and presenters is maybe look at some TED Talks. There are some great TED presentations around. Do a Google on a subject or an area, and you will find them. And listen to those people. Usually those are people who are not trained actors and deliverers of words. They're people who've had an idea or done something, as Simon has pointed out, like Lise Doucette, and can talk about it. And those TED Talks, in a short period of time, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, are super things to watch in order to learn from.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great advice as well. Sorry. Do you expect a follow-up or a sort of note or an email afterwards, after the pitch or the presentation? Is that expected, and that's something they should
Well,
do?
usually we proactively follow up. We always proactively follow up with our entrepreneurs that have pitched to us. And the reason we do that is because we want to give them good feedback. So we may not be investing, as I said earlier, we're only going to invest in a small proportion of the companies, but we can usually help in some way. So we can usually connect with other individuals that we think may be able to help. They might be somebody in industry through one of our industry connections, or they might be another investor. They might be a more appropriate investor, or they might be somebody who could help coach or mentor if we didn't think we were the right people. Or we might, for example, say we're not the right investor because we're fairly deep tech B2B focused and this is a B2C business. So have you thought about going to XYZ investor? Something else we may do a lot, which we haven't really talked about today, but you talked about the funding journey earlier from seed, Series A, Series B, etc. One of the things that increasingly we do as angels is introduce our companies to later stage investors, venture capitalists, VCs as we call them. And that's really important because it allows the companies to build up a relationships again earlier. Who might be an appropriate investor? I've got a VC who called me last night and said, can we have a chat tomorrow? They want to know what we're doing, what I'm seeing. Are they missing things? I know enough about that venture capitalist to know already. I'm thinking about which companies should I talk to them about that I know they're interested in. And those relationships are really important. That's another way that we can help our entrepreneurs, our companies.
And hence it's probably worth people pitching as much as they can to angels, because it might be that they're not getting investment, but they're going to get steered in the right direction. They're going to get advice and feedback anyway. Actually, on that, should founders almost save the more appropriate or the better angel later so that they can gain some advice?
That's a good question. I think the answer is yes. Practice makes perfect. It isn't that you will be a practiced and really polished presenter if you haven't done it before after some 5 or 10 presentations. But certainly what you will know is the need to develop answers to those key questions that investors are asking. They are excellent reviewers, if you like, of your work. They will ask questions that you may not have thought of yourself. So, yes, I think to a certain extent, saving the best till last is probably a good approach. But don't wait too long. I think in my career, I've learned a few things, and I've learned some things actually quite recently, last 10 years or so. And one of those is not to actually follow it to the letter, but move fast and break things. It's said that Mark Zuckerberg said that. I suspect a few people in California probably followed that approach. But do practice. Do see a number of investors, perhaps before the best ones, but don't take too long about it. Get on with it.
Mm. There's all great advice, and what's good is I know that a lot of founders or entrepreneurs looking at early stage investment, they can find a lot online, Google. There's so much information out there, but it's really it's so valuable getting or invaluable getting insight from yourselves, because it's these small bits of advice from the other side that are really going to help them.
And sorry, just on that, the great thing about places like IdeaSpace, Maxwell Center, is you can go and noodle with founders, with investors. You can have them on your courses, or even after your seminars as mentors and coaches. And having that informal discussion will not only put you in touch with people who might invest in you, but also people who can help you along the way. So that informal, often called meeting at the water cooler thing is great. And, luckily in Cambridge, we have places, IdeaSpace, Maxwell Center, where you can just go and do that.
Mm. You're right. I know we probably overuse the word serendipity, but it always comes to pass or to play in a relaxed. We have sort of mix and mingles or founders breakfast or these sort of semi-social events, just getting people together. And sometimes there's a theme, sometimes there isn't. It's just a chat, but there's always someone there who will say, "Oh, I can help you with that," or "I know someone." It's always the case, and I'm sure Cambridge is, especially good at that. But just anywhere, I think that's why it's important for people to not be shut away in their rooms. Especially, I was going to touch on COVID or the effects of it on how people have approached you or pitched to you, etc. But to not be shut away working on what they see as their problem, but getting out there and sharing and talking and meeting other founders and investors.
We have changed our business model during the pandemic, so we are more of a hybrid model, and we've changed it permanently. So our informal pitching, which Phil described earlier, is now going to remain online because we found the entrepreneurs like it better. They find it more productive. And we as investors find it more productive. So we're going to stick. It's much more efficient. They learn a lot more in a shorter space of time. Why wouldn't you continue? So, and it also means that some of our, we've got investors in Cambridge Angels from California, so they can join a call, whereas they couldn't have done previously if we'd had a physical meeting in Cambridge. So that's changed permanently. The other thing that I always say to people that the pandemic has accelerated the use of technology. And so that, particularly in healthcare, for obvious reasons, but that's one strong reason why we've seen so many healthcare deals in the last 2 years. But Cambridge was already strong at that, and we've seen AstraZeneca open their new global R&D HQ, a £1 billion investment in R&D. That is a significant. We need to see more of that sort of thing going on in the UK if we want to be a world leader. And the significance of that is that entrepreneurs can actually go into their coffee place on the first floor and go and network with people. So if you're trying to build a business in healthcare, why wouldn't you go there?
Great. Well, thanks. It's just excellent insight into pitching and presenting, and some really useful advice for our members and the founders who'll be listening. Or there's just sort of some other. In fact, before I ask any other questions, and not to scare anyone too much, but have you had any like real horror stories with pictures or presentations, or has it not been too bad?
Well, I thought you were going to say, have we had any horror stories with some of our companies? You know,
Well, that was going to be another question.
Yes, absolutely, we have. That's part of the rich tapestry of angel investing. So in my own case, I've had 10 exits, 10 successful exits. I've had 8 failures. I expect to have more failures, and we see all sorts of issues. We see the investors falling out. We see the team falling out. We see the technology not working in the way it was expected to work. Or we see businesses that are actually being too early, if you can believe that. They're ahead of the market, and they don't survive long enough to reach the point. Timing is very important, so they don't reach the point where their time has come, because they can't get there, because they can't fund it long enough to get there. So those are some of the things we've seen. Phil will have plenty more, I'm sure.
Yes, it's somebody once said prediction is very difficult, especially when the future is concerned. And we're not seers and futurists on the whole, but I think as investors, certainly as founders, what you need to do is to do your thing, do it in a right, legal, moral way with conviction. And by doing that, you will, I think, encourage people to join your family, to come to you, to invest in you, and maybe, who knows, over the long term, buy your products. But if you do things that way, you will be happy in yourself. You'll be able to sleep at night. So those sound like, what's the word? Very soft words. But it's that inner belief in yourself and doing things the right way, which I think is very important. And certainly, I think I see in founders that I want to invest in. And when I don't invest.
Also, the network is so strong in Cambridge that if you think that you do something and nobody's going to find out about it, you'll be wrong, because they will. So if I go and behave inappropriately with a company, others will very quickly find out. They'll find out in a matter of days. So trust and integrity is so important.
Yes.
Do you have you ever found yourself chasing a company or having a ding dong with other investors to try and go after one they're the one that people all want, or does it not quite work like that?
It sometimes works that way. I mean, there are some companies, just talking about the Cambridge Angels, where one or two of us would invest. As I've said before, I think I wouldn't invest by myself, because I like other angels there to talk to share ideas with. And I think, as Simon pointed out earlier, it's certainly very important as a founder to have more than one founder. It's a very lonely job being a sole founder. And indeed, a lot of investors don't like backing sole founders. I think if you were, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, we wouldn't mind backing you, because you have done it before and you can be a sole founder. But otherwise, it's quite difficult, I think.
Yeah, and also I think to add to that, I think at the slightly later stage, if we've got a really exciting company, there may well be a queue of venture capitalists trying to invest. So there is a scrabble, if you like, for the so-called hot companies.
Yeah.
Back to another point that Phil just talked about. It's really important. I often say that it is almost as important to me who the other investors are as the people I'm investing in.
Yeah.
Because I mentioned earlier, one of the problems that I've had, a good example is when you have 3 or 4 different groups of investors and they all have a slightly different idea of what the company's future should be and how the company should achieve that objective. That usually ends in disaster, because the founders are pulled in lots of different directions and they're confused about their strategic direction. And I've had some of my failures have been exactly that issue.
Should early stage founders be looking at your VC connections, and just, would you go that way? Would you say, well, these angels are actually, they've managed to get Series A with that? Do you look that far ahead, do you think?
I don't think that many entrepreneurs do that. They could do that, but I think that's only one part of the equation of success. Perhaps a more important part of the equation is actually, do the investors that you've got have a skill set which is actually relevant to the business I'm running? So, if you are founding a semiconductor business, which is a difficult space to be in, you need to be surrounded by people who've got some expertise in semiconductors. May sound rather old-fashioned, but actually having expertise is quite important, in my humble opinion.
Yeah. And I think obviously when you've got teams of one or two, hopefully, co-founders or more, when it's slightly smaller teams, you need that help and advice. I mean, there are so many people offering themselves up as advisors and mentors, but someone who's got kind of skin in the game as an angel is clearly going to be a lot better at, not a lot better, but probably of more use to you as a founder.
And as Simon pointed out, there are a good number of angels, some 55 or 60, and we also, among our members, we have corporate angels, people who are small or medium-sized VCs who are corporate members. So when progression is required, and as an angel company, a company that raises a seed round, you may raise 50 to 100 to maybe 500,000. But when you need to raise 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plus, having those corporate members does actually help. But I guess the other side of the coin is that if that company grows successfully after 1, 2, 3 years, hopefully with the coaching, with the input from the investing angels, they will be visible in the market, and they will have created something that will encourage a lot of VCs who perhaps don't know about them or the Cambridge Angels, or even indeed Cambridge from other parts of the world, to take a look at that company and maybe invest. I remember in Cambridge Silicon Radio, we gave a pitch in California, and I remember one American investor said, "Well, interesting company. We hadn't actually heard of you before, but now we have. We think you're quite interesting. We can't actually believe that doing what you're doing, you come from Cambridge, UK." He said, "We might believe it if it was Cambridge, Massachusetts, but Cambridge, UK?" They didn't actually turn out eventually to be an investor in our company, but...
Well, I want to spend so much more time with you because it's been really interesting, and I know a lot of our members here at IdeaSpace and other founders and entrepreneurs listening in will likewise want to hear more, because it's been really, really insightful. So many great pieces of advice there. What I do like to ask is, obviously you're prominent in the business world, not just in Cambridge, but nationally, internationally. Where can people find you or find out about you? Have you got social media presence or on LinkedIn and that sort of thing?
Oh yes. You can find us on Twitter, LinkedIn. We can find me on Twitter at Thorpe SI, imaginatively my surname followed by the first 2 letters of my first name. And you can find me on LinkedIn, and you can find me through Cambridge Angels, and you can find me in a number of places. So I've got quite a big digital presence, for better or worse.
Great. Okay. Well, Simon, thank you. So people listening, do look. It's worth following. It's worth finding a little bit more about our guests, because they do give out a lot. And Phil, how about yourself?
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn, and I accept invitations. Do a search on CSR, Cambridge Silicon Radio, and you'll find quite a lot of stories about us. Welcome contact with people who have ideas. But if you have an idea and you're polishing it, do get in touch with the Cambridge Angels, cambridgeangels.com. And we have a team. We have a deal wizard, Emmy, who will help you, who will look at your pitch. And as Simon has said, we see thousands of these a year. We do filter them. We do help where we can. And getting in at the top of that funnel, that filter, is a good idea. But yeah, we are out there and contactable, certainly.
Well, great, thank you. So we'll be obviously putting some details about how people can find out about Cambridge Angels within the text of the podcast. But thank you for your offer for people to find more personally about you as well as the Angels. So thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Cheers. For more information or any inquiries about joining Ideaspace, please contact us via ideaspace.cam.ac.uk or via any of our social media channels.